So, good evening, namaste, and thank you all for taking the time to join us in this conversation with my good friend and renowned yoga teacher and yoga therapist, Kaustubh Desikachar. So, before I introduce Kaustubh, allow me to say a few words about myself. My name is Shailaja Menon, and I have been in the field of yoga for over 20 years now. I began my journey in Coimbatore, India, with integral yoga, and I continued here with my teacher Manoj Kaimal in Malaysia. Along the way, I became an author, and my book Yoga Shakti was published 2 years ago. I also run a yoga studio, Mat and Beyond, here in Malaysia, and these are all just different platforms to express my love for yoga. I began these conversations during the lockdown to share authentic information on this profound practice so that it can be understood as so much more than just an exercise class that we do once a week, which is what it is sadly reduced to in a lot of places. So before I go on to introduce Kaustubh, those of you who are already here, please say hi, leave a comment so that we see you and we know you're here and we're also happy to interact with you. So let me get going. Kaustubh, as most of you know, is a renowned yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and author, continuing the classical yoga tradition of his eminent grandfather, T. Krishnacharya, and father, T. K. V. Desikachar. Kaustubh's grandfather, Guruji T. Krishnamacharya, is considered the father of modern yoga. And the revival of modern day yoga is to a large extent attributed to him and his legendary students, who include Guruji B.K. Iyengar, Guruji Patabi Jois, and Kaustubh's own father, Guruji T.K.V. Desikachar. Kaustubh began studying yoga when he was only 9 years old under his father, and he began teaching by the time he was 13. He has a dual master's degree from the renowned Birla Institute of Technology and Sciences and a doctorate from the University of Madras. Kaustubh conducts teacher training and therapist training programs around the world, traveling 8 months of the year to Europe, China, and other parts of the world. He has authored several books too, and to name a few, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, To Serve with Love, a tribute to T.K.V. Desikachar, The Yoga of the Yogi, The Legacy of T. Krishnamacharya, and his most recent one, Truth Unclouded, The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. His objectives include the sharing of authentic teachings of yoga to the modern era and building bridges between different healing modalities to promote physical, emotional, social, and spiritual health. So this conversation came up because as we mentioned the word Kundalini, a whole mystical world opens up. From Kundalini Yoga to Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, Kundalini courses that claim that they can awaken your Kundalini in 7 weeks. There are Kundalini specialists, Kundalini syndrome, Kundalini psychosis, the dark side of Kundalini. So I came across all this as I was researching for this conversation, right? So there's a whole Kundalini world out there, and Kaustubh is going to unravel that for us. So I invite him to begin this conversation with a chant.
Thank you, my dear Shailaja, and it is a great pleasure to be here with you and chat about this great mystical concept. We will start with an auspicious chant. भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः Namaste friends, good evening.
Good evening, and it's lovely to see so many of you here. So let me just say hi before we go into the questions. There's a lot of the people who have become regulars now. There's Viji and Kasturi. There's Mini there, and there's Lalu, and there's my aunt Kutimai, who always gives me very valuable suggestions at the end of every talk. There's my cousin Prakash. There's Dr. Rahul there. So welcome all of you. There's Tanvi. I think she's your student. Anyway, welcome all of you. My friend Murli. Please ask your questions in the comment section. Make this as interactive as possible. I'm sure all of you are very intrigued by Kundalini as well. Ignatius' uncle was just asking me, what Kundalini was really, and so I said I would let Kaustubh unravel that for him. So the first question begins with the topic today: what is Kundalini Shakti, and what philosophy is it derived from, and can we talk a little bit about nadis and chakras and how all of it tie in with Kundalini?
I thought it was supposed to be one question. You have asked like 4 or 5 questions.
Sorry, we can go over it one by one.
That's okay. So I really, before we talk about what is the Kundalini or what is the Kundalini Shakti, etc., it's important to understand a little bit about our teaching traditions and how they present concepts. Because if we don't understand that, then we will stay ignorant about these facts. So the yogis of the past, they were presenting many of these teachings through what is called metaphors for a couple of reasons. Firstly, when we talk about it like metaphors or stories, etc., we remember very well because these teachings were taught to us when we were very young. So we would remember the story as we grow, and as we become more and more mature, we would understand it, because we would understand the more deeper versions of the story, because the story doesn't change, but the meaning changes as our own mind is evolving and changing. So that's one reason why they talked about metaphors. There's another reason why they talked about metaphors, which is basically that they would want only those who are serious enough to understand, not everybody to understand it. They were not, the ancient teachings were not really given so easily, like spoon fed, like today education is happening. Ancient spiritual teachings were always something that you needed to merit and you needed to kind of deserve. So they did not exclude it, but they put it in a metaphor so that only somebody who would put the effort to understand will understand. Taking it literally, they will not get the meaning. And that's why they put all these metaphors right in front of our eyes, but only somebody who is curious enough to see it will see it. So this is the first thing that we have to understand. And that is where we talk about all these metaphoric concepts like the Kundalini, because Kundalini is a metaphoric concept. And they have placed it right in front of our eyes wherever we are going. Wherever we are going, it is present in our, right in front of our eyes. For example, if you go to any Indian temple, you may see some photographs like this. You may not photographs, sculptures like this. Now, if
Correct.
you look at it very carefully, this is a representation of the Kundalini, the Nadis, and the Chakras. This is the two Nadis, and these are the Chakras. These the pieces in the center are the Chakras, and if you look, that is the divine that is placed on top here. In this case of this image, it's Lord Kartikeya, who is actually the son of Shiva with his peacock. Now, you have to understand that this is a metaphoric concept and it is there everywhere. In every temple you go, right next to my house, there is a temple for the goddess Durga, and there is this image of the snake and the chakra everywhere because this is the metaphor. So, basically, the concept of this is that our human system is endowed with prana that is moving through the parts of the body, and they are moving through the seven chakras that we have, and through that seven chakras they are connected to all the parts of the body, physical body, all parts of our emotional body, all parts of our psychological and spiritual bodies as well, and that is why this has been presented this way. And just to show about this metaphor, why do you think people in the past, the yogis, they called Padmasana as Padmasana? Now, if you look at it very carefully, if you look at all these chakras, they are presented in the form of lotuses. Padmasana is not called Padmasana because the position looks like a lotus. Padma is a synonym for the word chakra in Hatha Yoga. That's why you have the verses in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika where it says that if you do this and this bandha, or if you do this and this mudra, sarvani padmani vidyante, all the chakras will be pierced, but they use the word padma. So it's a padmasana is never does not look like a lotus at all. It is a position meant to do pranayama in, so that the so-called lotuses, the chakras are getting the prana. That is why it's called Padmasana. Nobody's Padmasana looks like a lotus. That is just very good imagination. So this is a metaphor. All these were metaphoric. And the Kundalini was a metaphor for all our dark egoistic energy that is trapped in our body and that gets located in the Mooladhara chakra and is blocking the flow of prana. It's a metaphoric concept that represents our ego-based creation of our blockages at conscious and subconscious levels. Now, the Kundalini is not meant to be awoken. In all the Hatha Yoga Pradipika texts, they say that word, but that is a metaphoric way. The Kundalini is not, if you read even Hatha Yoga Pradipika, wherever they talk about the Kundalini waking up metaphorically, if you read the next line, next shloka, it says prana moves in Sushumna. So prana is supposed to move in the Sushumna, not Kundalini. Kundalini cannot move in the Sushumna because all the nadis, they can only carry prana, they cannot carry anything else. Kundalini is not prana. Kundalini is a metaphoric concept that represents our dark side, our shadow side. That is why it is presented as a poisonous snake. And that is why if you look at many of the Hindu gods, the Kundalini is one way or the other presented everywhere. If you look at Shiva has a cobra around him, not because of a decoration, it's because it means that he has tamed the ego. The poisonous snake is considered to be the ego-based creation. If you look at Kartikeya, as I told you in this, Kartikeya is presented with a peacock. That is the natural enemy of the snake. Why? Because that snake has to be destroyed. Kundalini has to be destroyed, not woken up. And Hatha Yoga Pradipika says that when you are doing mudras and other things like that, The Kundalini, which usually goes and gets stuck in the Mooladhara chakra, is lifted upward metaphorically so that it is burnt by the metabolic fire so that prana can move. The reason why it's called a Shakti is because it's very powerful. It takes over our life. We don't operate from the non Kundalini space, the non egoistic place. We don't operate from the place of clarity. We operate from the place of darkness. It takes over. It's an ego structure that's taken over. That is why it's called Shakti, because it holds all of our energy. The more energy you give your ego, you boost your ego, the ego is not happy, it wants more. The ego wants more. It's almost like, there is a new book that has come out that is about the American president, which says that too much wealth but never enough. The same way ego wants too much attention but never it's enough. So the more you are boosting your ego, the more it wants, and so the more it gathers the energy. That's why it holds a lot of our energy. It takes a lot of our energy. So it's not, the energy is not going elsewhere. And that's the metaphor. The prana is going through the Sushumna everywhere. So if the Sushumna's passage is blocked, how can the prana go everywhere? It cannot go everywhere. That's why the Kundalini has to be destroyed, burned. This is the actual meaning behind it. The concept of Kundalini moving through the chakras and other things is just a fantasy created by people who have not really understood the Shastras, the teachings very well. And that is why there is so much of garbage in the name of Kundalini, because we really do, people don't understand this concept very well. If you read classical Hatha Yoga texts, you have to understand it not literally, not like literal meaning, but you have to look at it metaphorically. That is the beauty of Indian culture. And that's why if you go in any temple in India, you will see these icons everywhere, but only the mind that is curious enough to understand will understand. Others will take it literally. Oh, Kundalini is like this, Kundalini is like that. All that is absolutely false information. You read very carefully texts like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you will understand, because never they talk about Kundalini moving in all the chakras. Immediately after they say about metaphorically the Kundalini waking up, they talk about prana moving in the chakras, not Kundalini at all. It's a metaphoric concept that we have to understand the deeper meaning, not literally take as if it's something very exciting. And that is why we have so much confusion. So that's why that is what is called Kundalini Shakti.
Okay, so I have no idea what else I'm going to ask you, because everything was based on Kundalini rising and awakening and flowing.
I'm sure you will manage.
So, when was this whole, Kundalini philosophy, in what text was it first mentioned, or, how does it come into our scriptures?
I have no idea because it's very old. Because even in the Upanishads, not only the Yoga Upanishads, but even in the earlier Upanishads, what is called the Mukhya Upanishad, the Rishi era, things like the Chandogya Upanishad or the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, they talk metaphorically about seven pranas. Sapta pranaha. Now, when the moment they say Sapta pranaha, maybe they are referring to the seven chakras. So, and we don't know the exact origin of that text, which year it was created, we don't know, because it is a Veda, Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, they are the main Upanishads. So, we don't know the exact origin. Later came what is called the Yoga Upanishads, which talk about the Kundalini in a much more direct way, or certain other Hatha Yoga texts like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or the Raja Yoga Ratnakara, the Shiva Samhita, Gheranda Samhita, Goraksha Siddha Siddhanta, etc. There are many, many texts which talk about it, but we don't know exactly when these things started, because old texts, they talk about the idea that there is seven pranas. So that is why we don't know. And somehow you have to also understand that all of these texts, even that which came later, they were not meant to be taken literally. They were all directional. They were not meant to be taken literally because our sampradaya, our tradition, has that all these studies have to be learned from a teacher student privately, and the teacher would teach depending on the intellectual capacity of the student. That's why all our texts they are called Ding Matra Darshanam. Ding Matra, Dik Matra becomes Ding Matra, which means it is a directional text only. Even Yoga Sutra is not meant to be like a manual where you read one line and interpret it for your life. It's a directional text that you have to learn under the teacher to understand the different meanings. This is why all our texts are not meant to be taken literally, they are not manuals. See, when you buy a car, for example, you buy a Mercedes Benz, a German car, they are so fantastic into creating a manual. They will give a manual on how to operate the car. That's a manual. You can read it literally and implement it. Yoga Shastra is not like that. We need an acharya, we need a student, and that's where the confusion comes, and that is where the origin is very old. Because remember, Patanjali talks about the chakras. Nabhi chakre kaya vyuha jnanam. So it must be older than Patanjali. He may Patanjali talks about these things. Kurma nadyam stairyam. He talks about nadis. So they were so fascinating that we don't know the origins, and you will never know because we are not so great in documenting such kind of things.
So we have Dr. Ananda here who says yoga tradition requires a living lineage. And he also says these texts were never meant to be manuals of instructions and were more like class notes. So
Yeah,
welcome, Dr. Ananda.
when you are doing videos with Dr. Ananda, my dear brother, you see sometimes there are some images of the gods behind, like Ganesha and things like that. And even there, you will see the snake. Ganesha will wear a snake around his belly. It's a metaphor to say that Ganesha has mastered the snake. The snake has not mastered Ganesha. So the Kundalini should not master you. You must master the Kundalini, and the Kundalini has to be destroyed. That's why when you look at all these animals and other things that these see with Kartikeya, they have the peacock whose enemy is the snake. For Vishnu is Garuda, whose enemy is the snake. Why the hell we have to destroy all the snakes? Because that dark snake, the poisonous snake, usually the poisonous snake, cobra, it's because the ego is very poisonous. It can consume you. It can consume you. That's why it's considered poisonous. It's not literally poisonous. It is metaphorically poisonous. It's not that if you eat the Kundalini, you will die because there's nothing to eat. Actually, it will consume you because the ego is such a poisonous entity. That's why they say destroy the ego. And this is not unique only to Vedic tradition. Even Buddhism talks about destroying the ego. Jainism talks about destroying the ego. So it's only modern day Bollywood that says boost your ego. You know, Hollywood and Bollywood, it says boost your ego. But normally all the divine traditions, spiritual traditions, no matter where they come from, will always talk about mastering the ego or even destroying the ego. That's the idea of the Kundalini.
Yeah, so very interesting that our literature is mainly in metaphors and not to be taken literally, and they all stand for certain aspects. Like the snake is representative of the ego, and I think that's what we need to take away from this, that to not take things literally, because everywhere you see Kundalini represented with snakes, and there's so much of confusion about that. So literally some people think there's a snake there, and just to clear the snake aspect, it's generally represented as a snake with three and a half coils and the tail and the mouth. So what do the serpent and the coils represent, and why
See,
is
the metaphor of this is very fascinating because the Kundalini is supposed to be sleeping, right? The Kundalini is supposed to be sleeping. Why sleeping? Because it's subconscious. We are not aware that it is existing. And when you look anywhere in nature, When you see a snake that is sleeping, it forms a coil and it sleeps. So normally that is how the Kundalini is represented. Now later day interpreters somehow interpreted it as only 3.5 coils, or that it is eating its mouth, etc. But that may be later. But the idea that it's eating its tail is because it's almost like we don't know what the origin is, what the end is. Because our ego structure is not only coming from our life experiences, it's also coming from our ancestors. We are deriving these blockages from our ancestors' karma as well. There's another thing that we have to remember, that yoga tradition is accepting of what is called the karma theory. Yoga is not devoid of the karma theory. So, what impact our ancestors have on us is very relevant, and what impact we have on our future generations is very important. It's very important. Yesterday, I was watching a speech by the previous President Obama, who was saying our actions have impact on future generations. Basically, he was quoting the theory of karma. So that's why the thing is that the snake's origin and end is not clear, but also that it is self-consuming. Who does this ego consume? It's not consuming somebody else. It's consuming ourselves. That's why we become so depleted of energy, because we are consumed by the ego. Ego is the most strong enemy that we have, and ego is built on fear. That's why it's in the Mooladhara Chakra, because Mooladhara Chakra is representative of the fear emotion. So that's why they locate it in the Mooladhara Chakra, because ego is a fear created structure.
Very nice. Very well said. So we're just going into, you have to correct me here, but so there's a separate branch called Kundalini Yoga, and just want to explore that. In a general sense, isn't all like, what I have read also is like, all asana, pranayama, bandhas, mudras, all of it goes towards now awakening the Kundalini doesn't seem to be the right word, but maybe getting the prana to rise, through the Sushumna. So, how does, is there something specific that Kundalini yoga offers, or, do our general yoga practices like, asanas, pranayama, does it all go towards not awakening the Kundalini, maybe rising the prana?
Namaste. See, I am not a specialist of what is called as the Kundalini Yoga, which is founded by one modern day teacher. So before him, that Kundalini Yoga did not exist. So for as far as I am concerned, for me, that is not really a yoga tradition. It is just let's say one of the brands of yoga. It's not a yoga tradition. Just like you have other brands of yoga which are modern, they are not. I don't necessarily invest much of my energy in that, because I feel that I have limited energy in my life and I want to invest in what is worthy and what has got tradition. So I don't know much about the Kundalini Yoga branch or brand, but the purpose of all yoga, traditional yoga, whether you call it mantra yoga or hatha yoga or raja yoga or whatever traditional yoga is, it is the movement of prana. This is the basic, the free and fluid movement of prana. And that is what texts like Hatha Yoga Pradipika talk about. They are not talking about Kundalini rising. They're not talking about Kundalini awaking in a literal sense. That the implication is prana has to move freely through the Sushumna. Even if you read the chapter on the mudras, which is the third chapter, which is where the concept of Kundalini is actually presented in great detail. In the very beginning, already in the third verse, Pranasya shunya padavi patha raja pathayate tada chittam niralambam tada kalasya vanchanam. Then, when Kundalini is awakened, literally that word is there, there's no doubt about it, but what is happening? The Sushumna becomes the royal path of prana. Pranasya raja pathayate. It is not Kundalini prajayate. It is not that it is becoming a royal path for Kundalini. The Sushumna is the royal path for prana. So don't forget, my dear ladies and gentlemen, that the only thing that can move through the Sushumna is prana, not Kundalini. Kundalini is somehow blocking the entrance, which we are saying, hey, listen, we are doing mudras to get rid of you from the entrance. It's like the bouncer in a bar who is not allowing the people to flow freely into the bar. The same way, Kundalini is the bouncer who is preventing prana from entering Sushumna. Now, rather than, it's exactly the opposite, because in the bar, the bouncer is rejecting the people, whereas in Hatha Yoga, we are trying to reject the bouncer. We are trying to get rid of the bouncer so that prana will flow smoothly in the Sushumna. That is the most important reason, the flow of prana. All yoga must be based on that. There is even modern yoga, like all the musculoskeletal yoga. Asanas were not created for physical practices. Asanas were created for movement of prana in certain parts of the body. So this is
So,
very important.
yeah, I think you've made a really great point there about everything in yoga, all the different practices being about prana, and it's ultimately about the rising of prana. So, Mr. Balaji here says, my guru, Dr. Ananda sir, says it's the same. The basis of our Gitananda yoga tradition is flow of prana. And yeah, so Dr. Ananda also has many interesting comments to make about what you said about the bouncer and the role of cricket. So, yeah.
He's a
So,
cricketer. He's Gavaskar.
yeah, and he says he also likes that bit about the musculoskeletal yoga. So just hello to so many people who have showed up here. There's Erica. Hi, Erica. She says it's lovely to see you both again. So it's wonderful to have you here. There's Ignatius' uncle with a question. We'll go into the question a little bit later. Wonderful to have you here as well. I don't know what time of the night it is for you in London, but I'm glad you're here. There's Madeline. Hello, Madeline. Wonderful to see you here. And so many others here. Reiko from Japan. Hi, Reiko. Wonderful to see you here. And I really hope you're enjoying these conversations. I remember you're always there whenever Kaustubh is in Malaysia. So wonderful to see you here in all the conversations as well. And there's Yoshini. Namaskaram. Namaskaram to you too. And so let's go going back to the questions. Ravi says not getting audio. Can you guys hear us? Whose audio exactly? Like, is it mine or Kaustubh's? Okay, I'm just going to continue. If you guys can't hear us, just leave a comment. Yeah. So Erica says exactly asana for movement of prana, and she says Leela Yoga is devoted to this. Right? So we have many people, uh, supporting the concept of yoga being about prana. So this is again a very interesting question. As in, we have Nirvin who says he can hear as well. Thank you, Nirvin, for getting back to us. And Arvind Swami as well says all good about audio. Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful. So we can go ahead with the conversation. And okay, I'm just telling you about all the stuff I've researched and read about, right? So when they talk about Kundalini awakening, they talk about Kundalini awakenings that go back, and about this, lightning and rush of energy and swirls of energy. So all of that is associated with rising of prana. Is that
Yes.
what makes
Well,
people, all these
people,
experiences I heard about?
people get confused about this because there is a phenomenon in yoga that is called Udghata. It's explained in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika as well. Udghatam. Udghata means there's a surge upward, there's an upward surge. So,
Okay.
of course, prana moves from the bottom upward through the Sushumna. So now think about it. When there is a blockage in the bottom and prana is trying to push, but the blockage is very stubborn. So prana is trying to push more and more. At one point, the blockage is removed, the kundalini is removed, burnt, actually burnt, as Hatha Yoga says. So prana suddenly has this upward
Gush.
surge. That is called Udghata, and that is what many people confuse to what is called Kundalini experience. They think suddenly something has gone up their spine. It's nothing but a surge of prana. It can be very destabilizing for the unprepared. That is why when we are doing all these mudra and other kind of practices, there are certain set of prerequisites that have to be maintained. One of which is to have a very strong spine, so that when this energy moves up the spine, we are able to manage this energy without getting destabilized. Because there's another dimension for destabilization as well, which is what's the main function of prana? The main function of prana is to bring life to things. It brings life. It So, things that have been hidden, suppressed for a long time, which is the representation of the Kundalini, suddenly wake up. This could be your traumas from your past. This could be the traumas from your ancestors that you are not aware of. So, suddenly you have all these very disturbing emotions, very disturbing feelings, sometimes not even cognitive, that it shakes you, it rattles you. That's why many countries in the West they they take people to the psychiatric clinic if they claim to have these kind of experiences because they think something is wrong. But basically, it's like that. Think about it this way: you have a closet which you have never visited because it's very dark part of your room. You shine light in that room. You see all the skeletons in the closet. That's very destabilizing. The same way, when we do these kind of practices like mudras and bandhas, it's not going to be all this new age yoga like peace and love and rainbows, always feel good, feel good, feel good. If you want to feel good, go to a restaurant, have a nice food. Yoga is about dealing with our darkness first before finding light. So, this darkness can be very, very destabilizing. And that's why not everybody was taught. And that's why, even when it was taught, the people were asked to go into the forest somewhere alone to practice so that it does not disturb or hurt or harm anybody else. Because imagine if you had some very deep, violent trauma, energy suppressed inside you, and that gets woken up, you could direct it to other people and injure or harm somebody else. And that's not fair. You could be living with a family where you have children or elders or things like that who are weak and not able to defend themselves. You could turn that towards them, and that's not right. That's why they said, please go to the forest, practice alone. Ekante mathika madhye. Practice alone. These kind of things don't practice with other people, not because they wanted to isolate themselves, because these kind of experiences, when the darkness comes out, it can harm other people. It's only after these darknesses are all removed that the light will shine. How can you have light when there is a lot of cloud? The sun is there, but if the cloud is covered, you need something to move the cloud. So this is what is confused as the Kundalini experience. It is nothing but a phenomena called Udghata, explained very nicely in some of the commentaries of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. In different parts, they talk about this experience. But as I said, it's very, very powerful.
So we have some comments here. So Erica says, when I can feel my fears, accept it, and find a way to handle it, is it possible to become less egomaniac, egomanic?
It's one of the ways, but there are many other things. Fear, dealing with our fears, accepting them is one of the ways.
And then I have my cousin Prakash who says, what are the stages of Kundalini awakening or either prana rising? We've reworded it now.
Well, if you again you go back to the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you find the answer. There are four stages that are described: Arambhavastha, Ghatavastha, Parichayavastha, Nishpatyavastha. Arambhavastha, in the beginning stage, everything will feel so good. That's why the word is Arambham. If you understand our mythology very well, if you think about what is called, who is Rambha? Rambha is an apsara, an angel or a goddess or whatever, who is meant to seduce all the rishis. She is very delightful. She can play the music, she can dance, she can do many other things to seduce the rishis. So, in the beginning stage, Arambha, the senses will be woken up. Everything will become so good, so good, so good. It will be very pleasurable. You will smell better, you will taste better. Everything will be like so. And that's the stage where people are so excited about yoga and all that. Well, that only lasts for some time. Then comes the Gata Avastha. Everything starts to shake. It's like a rumbling of the drums. When a structure is collapsing, you see these construction sites where they are collapsing the old building to build a new building. When the structure is collapsing, the whole earth is rumbling. So that is what is called Gata Avastha. Gata is the mud pot, which people are used to playing the Gatam, the musical instrument. So the whole ego structures will start collapsing. That's the second stage. Many people, they don't want to enter this. They want to stay in the first stage because that is the peace and love, sweet and sweet, nice and nice stage. But the second stage is happening. And sometimes that's the problem. Once you enter the second stage, you will no more experience the first stage. And that's why people get disillusioned with yoga and run away. Because the drums have started to beat and the ego structures are starting to collapse. That's when they start hating the teacher, say bad things about the teacher, say bad things about yoga and all that. This has happened to me like more than a million times. That's what I'm saying. Then there will be the great collapse, that is Parichaya Avastha. You will feel like as if you are in depression, heavy stage where you are just numb. That's the reconstruction. Your psychological states, your spiritual state inside are getting reconstructed. You need to give that space and allow that time for your reconstruction. Only then, that is a very tamasic state, heavy, not much movement. After that will come the Nishpati Avastha, where Sattva dominates and your new light, you're filled with light. Then what I call this stage as when the caterpillar becomes the butterfly. And if you look at it metaphorically, the caterpillar is a very heavy, immobile entity. It's nowhere connected to the quality of the butterfly. The butterfly is light, colorful, graceful, moving. The caterpillar is heavy and immobile. That is exactly what Parichaya Avastha and Nishpati Avastha happen. And that is where we need to evolve. Many people, they come to these kind of yoga or deeper practices, feel good, but want to stay there. They think they are enlightened because they feel good, but no. The more you practice, the more you will go through the four stages, and people cannot retreat. That's when they say they lose their yoga, loses the charm in their eyes. Yoga loses this charm. And so they don't want to continue yoga, they want to attack yoga or attack the teacher because it will wake up your dark side. It will wake up a lot of your dark sides. And you don't want to believe that you have these dark sides because we want to believe that we are good people. Just because you have a dark side does not mean you're not a good person. We all have both sides. There's no
So
better
many takeaways
or
here.
bad side. Huh?
No, I said many takeaways here. I think the example of the caterpillar and turning into the butterfly is going to stick with me. I think that's really very, very interesting about how, how completely different the qualities of the caterpillar and the butterfly are. As in, the caterpillar is heavy and immobile, whereas the butterfly, on the other hand, is light, beautiful, free, flying. And I guess we have to keep that vision of the butterfly in our minds and to get there. So the struggle is that in between journey between that caterpillar and becoming the butterfly. And also to go back to what you were saying about the dark sides, I think this is something that we all need to talk about, because like you say, we all like to believe that, we're all so full of light and we are just wonderful people. And I think especially in the yoga scene, we tend to think a little bit more that, we are holier than thou kind of, people. And it's good for all of us to acknowledge that there are these shadow selves that we have, and there are these dark sides that we have, which I believe are triggered. Maybe they're not, on an everyday basis, but certain situations trigger them, certain episodes trigger them, meeting certain people triggers them. And it's important to be conscious of that and to work through it in order to become that butterfly that we seek to be. So yeah, I think Erica was asking about where in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and I think Dr. Ananda has answered. I
Fourth
think he's,
chapter,
yeah,
69. Arambhascha ghataschaiva tatha parichayopi cha nishpatti sarva yogeshu syadavastha chatushtayam. Fourth chapter, 69. It starts and it goes further in the verses.
yeah. I think many people have resonated with the caterpillar to butterfly. I have Shanti here who also says she likes your explanation. And there's a very sweet auntie, Radha auntie from Chennai, who says rocking. So Ignatius uncle is also happy. Arvind Swami has a question there. Is there any role of kriyas like Shankar Prakashalana in Kundalini or Prana Rise?
Kriyas presented in Hatha Yoga Pradipika have been presented as a way to cleanse the body of certain physiological impurities, like what Hatha Yoga uses the word sleshma, mucousy type of kriyas. They are not necessarily used in the practice for the waking of kundalini, this kind of kriyas that has been talked about. I think there needs to be more in-depth study done by such people to understand that the kundalini practices to burn the kundalini or move the prana, they start with mudra practices. They start and end with mudra, and Hatha Yoga talks about 10 mudras. And I want to make this point very clear. When we speak about mudra, it's not the hand gestures like Chin Mudra, Abhaya Mudra, all that is not part of the Hatha Yoga system. They are part of the school of dance. When we talk about Hatha Yoga mudras, they are mudras like the Uddiyana Bandha Mudra, Jalandhar Bandha Mudra, Viparita Karani Mudra, Maha Mudra, Mahaveda, etc. They use the whole body. These mudras, they are called the Hasta Mudras, they are derived from the school of dance. And there is a confusion because Lord Shiva is considered both the dance master and the Hatha Yoga master, and sometimes people present both together because of that reason. But if we have to be very clear, Hatha Yoga mudras are not the same as these hand mudras, what is called Hasta mudras. The Hasta mudras will not wake up the Kundalini. They will not. They are not at all part of the Hatha Yoga system. The Yoga mudras, Hatha Yoga mudras, as presented in the third chapter of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they are the ones that are dealing with the Mula and the Kundalini, etc.
Okay. So just to go over this, as in, I think what I've understood. So the first part of really getting the Kundalini to burn and prana to rise is, like you just said, the practice of mudras. Yeah, that's what helps to get the process going. And what are the other things that can be done? Like, does our regular asana practice, pranayama practice, does that all go towards this? Does it happen like unconsciously? Because I actually heard people in their comments talk so much about this prana rising unconsciously. Like they've never heard about this, but their body just went through this whole metamorphosis. So, do you actually have to do all these things, or you can just be like that and these awakenings happen?
I'll read a verse for you. आसनाभ्यास कालेषु निग्राह्याः प्राणवृत्तयः. During the practice of asana, you have to regulate the breath. So asana is not only a physical position. Asana is actually a position for pranayama. Any asana, not just Padmasana or Sukhasana. What are you doing in an asana for 20 minutes? You have to breathe. And asanas were created in such a way where when you breathe, stay in the asana and breathe, the prana is directed towards certain blockages in certain parts of the body. We don't have blockage only in one place. The blockages can go and sit in many places in our body. So that's why we have these asanas, and therefore, in asana practice, when we are regulating with conscious breathing, certainly the movement of prana is facilitated. And most interestingly, many of these bandhas that we are doing, whether it is the Jalandhara bandha or Uddiyana bandha or Moola bandha, you are doing it only in a position. There are certain asanas where these are possible, certain asanas where it's not possible. Now, one of the definition of a Hatha Yoga mudra, and that's why the connection between bandhas and mudras is so intrinsic, is because there's no mudra without a bandha. For a mudra to become a mudra, at least one or two mudras, two bandhas have to be done. Jalandhara and Uddiyana must be done for an asana or a position to become a mudra. It's not enough if you just do a position of, let us say, Mahamudra, but don't do the bandha. It will not become a mudra. The mudra is intrinsically tied to the practice of bandha. So when you are doing certain asana, like Paschimottanasana, you can do the Jalandhara bandha and Uddiyana bandha there and Moola bandha as well. That becomes a very potent mudra, and of course it will work on the kundalini, so to speak, so that prana moves into the sushumna nadi. Read Hatha Yoga Pradipika, what they say as the benefit of Paschimottanasana: pavanam paschimottanam ahuhu. The prana moves through the nadi that is on the back, that is called sushumna. Paschimottanasana is not meant to stretch your back, stretch your legs. It is meant to move the prana through the sushumna. Unfortunately, we live in a very stupid modern era where we have dumbed down version of yoga. We have just a physiological practice of yoga. This is coming mainly because of Western medicine influence on yoga, which is actually like following the blind, because Western medicine does not understand prana, therefore cannot understand yoga, because yoga is about prana. So that's why we have all these problems. So even in asana practice, it is possible to move the prana through the sushumna, and therefore metaphorically saying the kundalini is burnt or destroyed. Another part of that question, which is that it can happen automatically, spontaneously, and blah blah blah, that it's possible in this manner. When I do, let's say for somebody is doing Paschimottanasana for 12 breaths with the Uddiyana Bandha, it doesn't mean at the end of the Uddiyana Bandha, the 12 breaths are going to manifest. The Kundalini is going to be burned. This can happen at maybe another part of the day or maybe the next day, because the consequences of an action are not always immediate. Patanjali talks about this. Sopakramam, nirupakramam cha karma tat samyamat aparanta jnanam arishiyova. You do the practice today. Tomorrow there is a benefit. Tomorrow you are sitting and watching some TV or reading a book or having a conversation with your family member. Suddenly something can move. The blockage can dissolve at that time. It's not that you do it now and this is what is that instant gratification is not going to happen. So that's why people think, oh, it can happen anytime, oh, it can happen spontaneously. No, it won't. Unless you have done the prerequisites, this is not going to happen. So that's the other clarification to that part of the question.
So we have a question here from Shumain Thakur. I mean, I hope I'm pronouncing your names correctly. As a process, do we touch upon chakra
Thakur.
practice?
Thakur.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thakur. So as a process, do we touch upon chakra practice?
I don't understand the question. As a process, do
I
we
guess
touch upon-
basically, does this whole prana rising, does it involve chakra practice
the
consciously?
prana moves through the sushumna, waking up all the chakras. It activates, it brings it alive. And that is metaphoric. Why has it been presented as a lotus? Now, if you look at Indian mythology, there's a difference between a lotus and a lily. The lotus always blossoms when the sunlight touches it. Lily, moonlight; lotus, sunlight. Sunlight is a metaphor for prana in yogic language. Sun is Purusha, sunlight is prana. So when the prana is going through the Sushumna, the lotuses are blossoming. So that's what is the meaning of the chakras are blossoming. It's not literal. What is the meaning of the lotus blossoming? That means the lotus come to its full potential. It does not mean some lotus inside you is going to open. It means that chakra will come to its full potential. It will fulfill its duties correctly. So Nabhi chakra digestion will be good. It will metabolize our food very well, etc. Each chakra has a organ, emotion, and parts of the body connected. So all that will manifest. Nabhi chakra also has the connection to the voice. So if that is functioning well, your voice will be well. It has connection to perception because pitta is connected to eyes as well. Suryo me chakshati shvitaha. So eyes, your perception will improve. When your metabolism is good, your perception will improve. So obviously, that's how we have to understand.
So this is it's not a question I wrote down, but when prana rises up, right? So it rises up the sushumna, it awakens all the chakras, or rather the chakras blossom into their fullest potential, right? What are the benefits that we gain from that? So we talked a lot about traumas, shadows. Does healing happen through this process? What are the benefits of prana rising?
So, prana in the body, all the nadis are named after rivers. So, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna are basically Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati. So, Sushumna is called Saraswati, the river Saraswati. Now, when you take a river, water can move in which direction? Anyway, right? It can move it can hypothetically, it can move this way to that, this end to that end, or that end to this end. So in that river in Sushumna, prana can move down or prana can move up. Ego brings prana down. So the downward movement of prana is towards materialism. Upward movement of prana is towards health and spirituality. So that's why the classical texts like Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they say, move prana upward. It's metaphoric to say, elevate yourself. Don't become egoistic or ego bound or materialistic. Move in the spiritual way. But what is important is a balance is needed because we can't only float in the sky. So we need to ground ourselves as well. That's why inhale, downward movement, exhale, upward movement, we have the balance so that we are able to move. But overall, we have to elevate our prana so it becomes more and more lighter. That's the meaning. So you will heal, you will spiritually evolve.
So this just kind of ties in with Ignatius Uncle's question, and he says, "How does he uses Kundalini? Kundalini help in strengthening our inner willpower to be more creative, kind, compassionate? Does that happen through the prana rising?"
Kundalini will not help. Kundalini will weaken us. Kundalini will
I
make us weak.
reworded my question.
Yes. The movement of the sustenance of prana in the Sushumna will help us become more strong. That's why Jalandhara is called Jalandhara, because take the word Jalam. It comes from the word Jalam. What is Jalam in Sanskrit? Jalam is water. Water is a metaphor for prana. Dhara means to sustain, not to lose. So you sustain the prana in the Sushumna Nadi. But please remember, Jalam, again in the Vedic yogic language, Jalam is not any water. Only the water that has been sanctified by the divine is called Jalam. You go in the temple, they'll say Jalam. That means the water that is blessed. The water that is not blessed has other names. So Jalam is sanctified water. Now, what is sanctified prana? The prana that is in the Sushumna, that is the royal path, the divine path, that is Jalam. So you maintain the Jalam, that is the sanctified prana, that means prana in the Sushumna, that is Jalantarabandha. Then you will be healthy. If it is dissipating, you will not be healthy.
What about these emotional qualities? Like, does it help us become, have more elevated emotions, appreciation, gratitude, kind, loving, compassionate?
See, again, that is a new age thing. Like, if you only have kindness, gratitude, happiness, blah, 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 you are healthy. That is absolutely ridiculous. We are given all emotions for a reason. It's emotions are meant to balance us. It's a vega. So, just because you're angry, it doesn't mean you are a bad person. Anger has been given for a reason. Just because you have fear, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Fear has been given for a reason. What will happen, what is health is when the emotions are appropriately expressed. That means you're angry only when you are meant to be angry, not all the time angry. You're afraid only when you're meant to be afraid, not all the time afraid. The same with happiness. You cannot be happy always. That's got madness. That's called madness. It's not right. So, all that are illusions of this world that we create, and that's why we suffer because we are not able to live up to that illusions that we create. So, emotions have a place, all emotions.
I think that's a really wonderful point that you made, that all emotions have a place. I think it takes pressure out of all of us to kind of be happy all the time. I mean, I think it's very true that is this new age thing that we have to think positive all the time. And in fact, I think our stress levels kind of really rise when we at some point realize that we're not really feeling so positive because of this enormous pressure to feel positive all the time.
That's the problem, because we don't want to deal with all our emotions. We only want to deal with these illusory emotions. And since my dear friend Ananda is here, poor Ananda tried to make some video about all the 9 kinds of emotions and tried to post it in some American Facebook group, and they banned him and the video from the group because they only want to work with happiness, peace, love, compassion. That's illusion. That's not right. It's really, really ridiculous to think of it that way.
No, I think that's a very, very good point, that all emotions have a place in our life, and we really should not pressure ourselves to just be, to feel happy all the time or to have these elevated emotions all the time. I actually find myself, I mean, I'm just talking about myself, but I actually find myself getting quite, unhappy with myself when I feel like I'm not at that elevated state and I'm like, oh, this is not good. You shouldn't be feeling so low.
Let me ask a very simple,
Talk to myself and say, it's okay to feel not so happy all the time.
let me ask a very simple question to everybody, to everybody in this world. My father died 2016. Now, at that time, should I show friendliness, compassion, peace, love, generosity? I am in grief. That has to have a place. I cannot be, oh, forget about my grief. I'll be compassionate and peace and love and look at rainbows in the sky. That's absolute nonsense. I have to feel grief for my father, and that has to have a place. Otherwise, I don't have respect or honor for my father. And it has been given to me, this grief, so that it balances. It's very, very important.
I have to smile at that. Please thank Devasena ji for that lovely comment. And yeah, he says he loves you, Kaustubh. So Dr. Ananda is very appreciative of this particular conversation that we're having. And this my cousin Manju from Singapore also says she really likes that emotions are given such a. She says emotions are usually given such a bad name. Yeah, and I like that you mentioned anger as well. I mean, I think even grief we kind of accept, but anger is something that is so, like, nobody's supposed to get angry, period, right? And then you vilify people who get angry. Like anger has such a bad name. So
India India would not have got independence had not Gandhi gotten angry. If Gandhi was not angry, India would, in South Africa, what happened to him? Injustice, social injustice, and it was an appropriate anger. India would not have got independence because that is what changed his life. So sometimes we have to get angry towards the injustices that is happening in the world. Like really today, not today meaning today, but in these days, for example, there's a very tragic story of George Floyd's death in America, very, very brutally killed. That's an injustice. We have to get angry. We have to feel anger. We cannot show kindness and compassion and love. That's one part of it, but we have to stand up for some values as well.
I think anger is going to thank you for standing up for it, Kaustubh, because usually it is really so vilified. I mean, even when people get angry, it's considered such a bad thing. And especially, in the yoga field, you're supposed to never get angry. And, even you also hold yourself to such impossible standards and feel bad about yourself if you do get mad about something. Anyway, so I think the takeaway from this is really that all emotions have a place. And I really, really like that word that you used, emotions to be appropriately expressed. I think appropriate is such a great and correct word. So it doesn't mean just because we supported anger doesn't mean it can be, like unjustified anger, but appropriately expressed, all emotions have a place. And I really like what you said about India gaining independence because Gandhi got angry.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really nice one. Yeah. So Mini has a question here. So emotions can be channelized into positive action, but how do we control unregulated emotions?
Well, the reason why they become unregulated is because we are suppressing them in the first place. See, if I mean one of the word for emotions is vega, means something that comes naturally. It's a natural urge. So it's like a river that is flowing naturally. You can't stop it. If you stop, it'll go elsewhere. It'll go elsewhere. If you put a barricade to the river, it'll go elsewhere. The same way, if you try to suppress an emotion, that's why it'll explode elsewhere. So, what we need to do is we need to start learning how to express these appropriately in the appropriate place to the appropriate person. And once expressed, let go of it, not hold on to it. Once you let go of it, once you express, let go of it, don't hold on to it. The problem is we hold on to it and we hold on to what somebody says when they're angry or what somebody says when they're afraid of this or that, and then it creates all these problems because the ego receives it, not the heart. The ego receives an emotion, it reacts. The heart receives the emotion, it holds and responds.
So there's a comment here by Acharya Birju Maharaj. So thank you for coming on. And he says Shiv as Adi Yogi bears both anger and bliss. So yoga is all about balance. So I think, if anything, this conversation has given a place for all emotions, especially the vilified emotions of anger, etc. Right? So it's all right. We don't have to beat ourselves up if we, Like we are prone to get, angry, or we are prone to feel sad or not so great all the time. So Ignatius uncle has said loneliness is so widespread, and your suggestion for tackling it.
Find somebody. Connect.
Okay, Kaustubh. We need a more yogic reply here.
Loneliness is about disconnection. So we need to connect. Then we are not lonely. Connect to the divine, connect to nature, connect to yourself. That's what, as simple as that.
Okay, I think that was beautifully said. So that's it, Uncle. I think it's making connections to self, connections to people around you, connections to nature. That was beautiful. So you did get your yogic reply after all. So I think we have to wind this up. It's already 1 hour and 10 minutes. So I think Shraddha's waiting for her dinner as well. I saw you talking to someone.
She just came to remind me.
Yes, I know. So you can just do the closing chant, Kaustubh, and we'll wind
Today,
up this beautiful conversation.
today I am the cook, so I have to cook for her. Good. Let's do a peace chant because we have talked a lot about anger. So let us find some all the
See, so
emotions.
yoga does talk about peace and love, and you yourself are talking about it.
Peace, peace only comes from expression of anger, not suppression of anger.
Okay, point.
ॐ शन्नो मित्र शं वरुणः शन्नो भवत्वर्यमा शन्न इन्द्रो बृहस्पतिः शन्नो विष्णुरुक्रमः नमो ब्रह्मणे नमस्ते वायो त्वमेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्मासि वामेव प्रत्यक्षं ब्रह्म वदिष्यामि ऋतं वदिष्यामि सत्यं वदिष्यामि तन्माम् अवतु तद्भक्तारमवतु अवतु माम् अवतु भक्तारम् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः Namaste, friends.
Namaste, and thank you, all of you, for being here, for giving us your time, giving us your ear, and making this truly a wonderful conversation. So many of you here, students, friends. I have to mention Dr. Ananda and Dev Sena also, who's been giving comments, and all of you here, friends, family, well-wishers, supporters, yoga interested people. So thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. And I really hope you got some takeaways from this. Namaste.
Namaste, my dear friends.